Here it is, folks. We are live. Yay!
Happy Friday!
It's Friday. Happy Friday. So, hello. I kind of, you know what, Irwin and Ajirioghene, I'll ask you to just mute. We'll mute while other people are talking, just because everything is all funny. Um, Generally, I just sort of babble for the first little minute or so, just because people are starting to watch, and that's kind of exciting. But if you are watching right now, I am Laura May Lindo. I am starting this beautiful podcast called People in My Hood. It's a philosophical podcast. I just like the name of that. Doesn't it make you excited? People in My Hood. And this is literally people that I have met over the course of the last 3 years while I have been the member of provincial parliament for Kitchener Centre, and doing work in this wonderful neighborhood of Kitchener Centre. Um, but today's episode is actually a little bit different because I've also invited a friend. Because in our neighborhoods, we often have folks from outside come and visit us and such. And so I have invited some friends to be with me. So thank you to everybody for watching. Thank you for joining me for this live stream. Um, so how shall I begin? I shall begin this way. I am hosting this live stream from my home in Kitchener Centre. This land has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. Before, I often tell people, before I was elected, I was the Director of Diversity and Equity at Wilfrid Laurier University, and I remember being taught by the folks in the Indigenous area at the university, that a land acknowledgement, the easy part is figuring out the land you're on. You can Google that. There's like apps for that. The real work, the real reconciliation or reconciliation, is trying to make an honest connection between the conversation that you're about to have and the reality that you're having it on stolen land. And so when I think about the people in my hood that are joining me today, and I think about that connection, it's kind of easy, which is sad to say, but it's a pretty simple connection. Um, Consistently, continually, even today, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are overrepresented in our child welfare system, in our carceral system, in among the folks that are being pushed out of our school system. They're overrepresented in ways that are problematic and that are systemic. And the reason I wanted to invite these folks with me today to speak to you about not just being in the neighborhood, but why our meeting was so important and why the work that we're going to keep doing is so important is because we can't allow that overrepresentation to keep happening. But it will keep happening if we don't understand the why behind the overrepresentation. And so, with that, I'm going to introduce my lovely guests. These are the people. Doesn't everybody know that song? These are the people in my neighborhood. No, in my neighborhood. Yeah, in my neighborhood. No. So first, I have Irwin Elman with me. Irwin, unmute yourself.
Hi, Laura.
Hi,
Thank you for
Irwin.
having me here.
Oh, goodness. Thank you
Oh
for
my
being a
gosh.
person in my neighborhood.
Oh, you're welcome.
So listen, I before I sort of hand it over to you, and I have a couple questions for everybody in this podcast, I just wanted to start with this. The reason, the reason that I asked Irwin to join me is because of this amazing, amazing, amazing report. I am going to find the link and share it with everybody because it is important for everybody to read this report. It's called Hair Story Rooted, a firm foundation for the future of Black youth in Ontario's system of care. And Irwin was the former provincial advocate for youth. And when I first started as an elected official, and when I had these critic portfolios, anti racism, and originally citizenship and immigration, Irwin was like, I can't believe that I get to speak to Irwin Elman. I remember the first time I saw you at Queen's Park, Irwin. I know you don't even know this, but you just sort of came up to me and were like, hi, da, 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 da. And I was like, oh my God, Irwin Elman is talking to me. That was me.
And
That was
then you
totally
went
me.
to, oh my God, he's still talking to me. He don't shut up.
Absolutely not. I was just like, I don't know, folks. You must Google Irwin, because Irwin is the kind of person that just keeps fighting and is creative
Yes.
and recognizes what's going on in the system and is like, yeah, but that's not okay. So I'm just going to keep fighting. And then there is this kind of thing comes out. So I'm going to start off first by asking you, Irwin, before I introduce my other guest. I just want you to talk a little bit about the child welfare system, like its roots, its history, the why behind it, because we are overrepresented in that system. And I would like more people to understand what is going on and where those big gaps are.
Okay. Well, let me first start by saying I'm not in Kitchener, so I'm in Toronto, the land of the Anishinaabe, um, Mississauga New Credit, Wendat, Cherokee people, and I get completely what you're saying and about that's the easy part. Although it took me a while to know where I was. I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
like 50 years, 40
Yep.
years to know where I was and whose land I was on. And now I have so much work to do to understand what do I do about that. And I come from I know who I am, right? I know what I look like. So I come from a different location, as you
Yeah.
might say, in your former jobs days. You might say it still. So I know I have extra special work to do to understand what that means and what I'm going to do about it. Say that. The other thing before I answer your question quickly is that report you held up.
Yes.
You know, I don't want people to think that's my report. That came out of my office. You know who wrote that report? Hundreds of young people wrote that report. Hundreds of Black young people who were in systems of care, not just children's aid, but conflict with the law, the mental health system. Yeah. And they did that work along with some really great staff that worked with me. But really, the young people led, and it is a tremendous report, and people should read it, understanding that's the voice of hundreds of young people
Yes.
who were speaking for themselves and others who gave them permission. So I think it's incredible that they did that, and I am always honored to walk alongside them. And then I get to because when I met you and I came up to you, I'm scared, right? And I told you, I tweeted, I'm scared, and you said, "Well, you better be wearing pants," and I am wearing pants. You did.
I
I'm
literally
just outing you. You said that, and I have so much to learn, and I'm so privileged to walk alongside you. And then there's people I've not met Ajirioghene before, but the work that people like you do is so crucial, so hard, because you're doing the work and living it at the same time. At least that's my understanding from what young people and others like you tell me. And it is completely difficult. If I don't say this now, I'll forever regret it. Laura May, like the people of Kitchener have such a treasure in you. Like when you form the government, when you get elected in June and form the government, oh my gosh, what you're going to be able to do. Yeah. So Kitchener, you got a chance, right? To make a difference in the world, do it. That's how I'd say to them. Child welfare. No, it's the truth. It's the truth. So child welfare, what I want to say to people about that, because obviously we accept now, I think, if people know it and we accept it, this overrepresentation of Black children and families in the system, Indigenous children. And so I think before we talk, and anybody starts thinking, including the government and certainly the system itself, what are we going to do about that? We have to understand, like, to me, I learned that we don't have a child welfare system, so I don't use that word. We have a child protection system. There's no child welfare system. And the child protection system we have was created about 150 years ago in New York. And when it was created in New York and imported to Canada later, in Toronto was the first Canadian child protection agency, it came out of the animal rights, animal cruelty system. It was modeled on the same thing. You know, we have that animal rights system today. You know, an owner of a dog is abusing their dog. Somebody goes in, checks it out. If the owner of the dog is abusing the dog, take the dog away, put the dog somewhere else. That's what we do.
Yep.
That's the child protection system. That's how it was built. Somebody's abusing a child, or consider, you take the child away from its owner, get the language,
Yeah.
and you move the child to somewhere else who can own them. That's the first problem. The second problem is in New York, when it was created, and you can just Google it, people. It was created because there was a concern about the immigrant families coming into New York at that time. And the concern was they couldn't raise their children properly. And they couldn't raise their children properly to be good, fine, upstanding, productive citizens. And what that meant was good workers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to surveil those families to make sure they were raising those kids properly. And if they weren't, we'll take them away, and we as a state will raise them properly. And when I say we as a state, it's people that look like me, let's be frank, right?
Yeah.
That's who was making the decisions. Frankly, it's still the people making the decisions. Okay, so 150 years ago, that's the child protection system. It has not changed in its bones, and nobody will tell me I'm wrong.
No.
Because the system knows it. It's the same darn system. Yep. Okay. So are we surprised that it's doing its job? Yep. It's surveilling the families that people look like me feel like might not be raising their children properly to our standards, feel like might be more likely to abuse their kids. Mm-hmm. And so we surveil them, and then we bring them into care as if they're property.
Yeah.
No, not your property anymore. It's our property. Nothing has changed. It's in the bones. And let me be, I know I talk too much, but last thing, because I want to say it, I am not saying anything bad about people who work in the system.
Yeah.
I am not. And I think if they understand, and they have, if they understand that I'm not blaming them, mm-hmm. I mean, of course, I can talk about the micro practices. Yeah, there's some bad stuff for sure. I've covered it. But I'm not blaming the well-meaning people in the system who went to social work school and want to do some good in the world. But this is the system they're working in. Yeah. It is. And that's why we have overrepresentation. So then we can talk about what we're going to do about it once we accept that.
You know what, Irwin? It's so interesting that you say that and that you sort of ended that history there, because I often think about that with my own job. Like I walk into Queen's Park and Ajirioghene, please, you can unmute. Just unmute. I had a plan. I was going to be all professional. It's not going to happen. So just forget it. We're going in. So just before I finish that thought, I'm just going to say this. I'm also joined by Ajirioghene Evi-Cobbinah, who is the executive director of Kind Minds
Family Wellness.
Yeah. Kind Minds Family Wellness. I thought I was saying it right, and then I was like, did I? Yes. And the reason that I invited you here with us in this, People in My Hood philosophical podcast is because I have spent a lot of time in Kitchener fighting for culturally responsive mental health supports, culturally responsive wraparound supports, whatever those might look like. And a lot of people have questions about what I mean. And I remember when Kind Minds reached out to me, and you folks were doing it was the first day of one of the sessions that you were doing with youth and with elders in community. Mm-hmm. And you reached out to me and you were like, oh, we're starting up and we know it's the pandemic, but this is, people need us. I could not tell you, there's no words to express how excited I was to know that you were here doing that at the peak of a crisis where we were now overrepresented, not just in care, not just in, the carceral system, in prisons and courthouses, but also for those disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so to take that time and to see it as an opportunity to help, forever send you love and gratitude for that. So you are now part of the People in My Hood. And before I ask you the same question, I just wanted to go back to where Irwin ended off. Every day when I go into Queen's Park, and I sit in a place where, decades and decades and decades and decades of people and decision makers that don't look like me, that have no concept of what kinds of everyday challenges, everyday racism one experiences, make decisions about my life and make assumptions about what I need.
Mhm.
I struggle because I'm now working for the system that I know on the outside hurts so many people that look like me. But then I have to step back and remind myself that my energy in that system, just from an energy perspective, because I'm that kind of
Mhm.
gal, my energy in that space changes things.
Mhm.
My energy inside the system changes things, and allows us to do things like this, right? Where we're going to have some real talk about the systems that are problematic and make some real decisions about change, structural, systemic changes that we can make.
Right.
So I want to ask you, Ajirioghene, the same question with a bit of a twist. So I first want to start it off with this. A lot of people will accept, I say it all the time, that we are overrepresented in Black folks or overrepresented in child welfare. A lot of people will say to me, of course they are, but not here.
Mhm.
They always say that to me. Of course they are, but not here. Like that's in the States. Nah, it's here. And I mean like here in
Mhm.
Waterloo region, it's here. So, given your expertise and the work that you do, and this history that's been presented to us, and the needs that we already know, talk to me a little bit about the gaps that you see in the system around you.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you, Laura May Lindo, and thank you, Owen, for that. Even the fact that I still wear another hat and I'm in the child protection space, like you put it, I can definitely relate. And even it was refreshing to hear the refreshing in a bad way, but it was good to also be hit with the reality of how the child protection work started. So in terms of gaps, I think I will start from where Owen stopped in terms of, the idea of we taking the children into or child welfare system, bringing children into care, and then for sometimes when they return, or for those who remain in care, the lack of support. And I will rephrase lack of culturally grounded support for the caregivers of this youth or children in our care. And bringing it home to Kitchener Waterloo, it's really, really very scarce.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why Kind Minds actually started, because we are a number of professionals who weave in and out of spaces and who try our best in those spaces, but we also know that to move the envelope we really need to do things for ourselves, for our people. And that was one of the reasons why Kind Minds started, specifically around that. um, we call it Afrocentric counseling, that
Mhm.
mental health support, not only to children, but to the caregivers and the supports that are available, whether family or extended family. So the gaps, to answer your question, aside the clinical piece, which is to help people really deal with the trauma, because it is a traumatic experience when whether your child is in care or not, but just by being involved with child protection services, it's really not something that people go asking for. So it definitely brings about some kind of unpleasant experiences for families. So creating that safe space for us to support them and process that, but also to empower them as they navigate that very huge system.
Mhm.
And to talk about the gap is, it's not something that is new to any to either of us or anybody here or anyone listening. It's the socioeconomic stuff that impact Black bodies in our communities in Ontario, in Canada as a whole, right? So
Mhm.
systems, I like to always say the top reference to child welfare agencies, the education system, schools, hospitals, police system in cases of family violence and domestic violence. There's that lack of connection where people claim, or systems are claiming, to doing things in their spaces to be more equitable for people,
Mhm.
for Black identifying people. However, there's that disconnection as to how are we doing it differently collectively. There's a big gap in that. The school may say that we're supporting Black families, we're engaging them more. A family doctor may say the same thing. Criminal justice system is saying the same thing. And of course, child protection agencies are saying the same thing. But how are we doing it together, knowing what the data is saying, that there is an overrepresentation?
Yeah.
We may do it in silos, but the inability to actually do it together and hold one another accountable and have those very difficult conversations as to the policies are still the same. The practice, the principles are still the same. The strategies
Yeah.
are still the same. Nothing has changed, and we expect for there not to be overrepresentation. That's not going to happen. So there has to be that uh, dismantling of
Yeah.
systems and how we do things and how we engage families. So that's a huge gap that I said everyone can relate to, and it's not new.
Yeah.
Conversations are happening, but the actions are not happening fast enough, and families are still being impacted. The other one is Black bodies are not seen as experts of their lived experiences, and being Black, it's not monolithic. People have different intersections and different lived experiences. I stand here as a Black professional with a lot of privileges, and I cannot speak for every Black woman or Black mother. So the inability for systems to pause and see people as experts of their lived experiences, to unlearn and learn together in that process is missing in child protection work, because it's very, very it's almost fast paced, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
To go, there's a timeline, deadline for everything. Yes, the work is being done. I'm not going to say it's not being done, but because of the bigger system, it's really difficult to put parents or caregivers as experts of their lived experiences. I think I'll say one more, which is very crucial for me too, is the resistance to change.
Mm.
I'm not sure if you're aware of the the Owen laughing, the One Vision, One Voice recommendation as to what we need to do differently from the organizational context to direct service practice.
Yep.
It just has to change. But there is resistance to change because people are very comfortable to do the work the way they've always done it.
Yep.
And it's how do we then, when I say we, everyone in every space that is connected to Black identifying families, especially families who are involved in child welfare system, how do we then say this is how we're going to hold people accountable? Because this initiative has to move forward.
Yes.
So I can go on and on. I get really passionate about this, but I'll leave it as that. It's a resistance to change and inability to actually hold people accountable who are not following through with the recommendations and protocols that have been put in place, such as like the report you just talked about,
Yeah.
which from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and of course, One Vision, One Voice.
Well, that's actually a perfect transition to the second question. So part of what I try really, really hard to do in my life, no matter what my gig is to put like love and care into the universe, real visions that we can put into the universe so that we can start to collaboratively develop concrete steps to get somewhere, right? So with that first question, we've had a bit of time to explore on the ground where the gap is, where the gaps, there's many, but where are they and what kinds of things are happening? I just want to go back to two little things that you've said, Ajirioghene, before I move into the second part, because it leads so nicely in. One is I need to reiterate and validate for Black, Brown, Indigenous, other racialized folks, the fear that we have when we are put into these systems. And the reason I want to just pause and say this is because the systems are set up and presented to the public as though they are safe and they are to make us healthy and they are there to help us. But because of the history that Irwin started us off with, those systems weren't actually meant to do that for all of us. They were meant to do that for some of us, but they weren't meant to do that for all of us. And so when other people will say, there's some kinds of changes that are happening with family and children's services or with children's aid, and it's to make the space more welcoming. for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. Like, I just want the world to know that as a Black person, I get nervous because I don't want that to become a welcoming space for me. Because I like, why would I want that to be a welcoming space for me? It and so I think that take some time to chew on that, people that are watching. Like, take some time to think about that. If the place that is created to harm you keeps getting repositioned as the place that's supposed to now help you, but no changes have happened, how comfortable would you feel to access help from that space? Right? Which is part of the trust building, which leads me to the second thing that you said that I just wanted to again emphasize. Um, I think about, uh, actually, I have to say this before I say that. Sorry. I have to say this. There was an encampment in Kitchener. There was a lot of attention on this encampment in Kitchener, at Sterling and Charles, and there were pictures and videos of the belongings of our community members being bulldozed. Okay, we have this. We locally know about this. I remember having a conversation and being told that sorry, my sister just sent a note, which I'm going to speak to in just a moment. I remember being told that sometimes phone calls to bylaw officials, for instance, are being made because people are worried about the people in the encampments. And I'm sure that's true. Community members are worried and they don't know who to call. So who do they call? They call the police. They call the police. They call the bylaw. They call the non emergency police line. I just want us to pause with that. If the only way to help the most vulnerable are to call people whose job is to penalize and punish those that break the law, we are then saying that the only way forward is to criminalize poverty because we are not providing an alternative call, an alternative space to call to actually provide help. So if somebody is in need of help, I should be able to call a number that provides them with help, not a number that would generally their whole job is to penalize. I'm not saying anything bad about your gig. Your gig is that. But what I am saying is that our society is missing something if we feel that that is okay, right? So I call on all of us to think about my next question with these kinds of things in mind. What is it that we need from the leadership around us to make the alternative things that we are calling for real, possible? What are the things that we need from leaders around us? What do we need them to understand? Um, what do we need them to do so that there's a different kind of alternative that is care for the most vulnerable, for racialized folks in our hood, for folks that are struggling to find shelter, that are in and out of shelters, whoever it is? What is it that we need to address the gaps that you both have raised? So we're going to go backwards. So I'm going to ask you, Ajirioghene, to jump in and talk to me about what we want to see from leaders to address some of this.
Absolutely. I'll preface it by saying it's interesting. Years ago, before I started, weaving in and out of spaces where I will be considered, or people would say, oh, organic leadership and all of that. You think it's really easy from the outside. But, when people look up to you, I think one of the key ingredients is courage.
Yes.
There has to be courageous leadership when it comes to dealing or addressing inequities or things that have continued to cause harms or push people to the margins.
Mm-hmm.
And in being courageous means that you have to do a lot of calling out respectfully, but calling out, because sometimes when you've had these conversations behind closed doors and it's not going anywhere, you owe it to the community to at least be transparent, bring them along, let them know what you're pushing for. And
Yeah.
that takes courage, because many times they would such conversations around injustices will always want to be behind closed doors and keep pushing the agenda. But to move things forward, I think what is required of anyone in that leadership position is to really become courageous and to what I say, I mean, people don't use this words too much. I actually just started using the phrase because I believe so much in it, is to build co-conspirators to move the work forward. Because it's not something just one person can do, especially in a leadership position. And co-conspirators could be people who hold privileges and spaces. They could also be people who are already doing great work and are respected in the community. They need to be brought along.
Mm-hmm.
And in bringing people along, building co-conspirators, then you can continue to welcome people to hold you accountable because you've done your work. You've said, you know what, these are XYZ that I'm going to be dealing with. I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to give you progress report, and I'm doing it with X, Y, and Z people. And I'm also going to be respecting people who have been doing great work, people in the Indigenous communities, in the Black communities, in other spaces, LGBTQ plus communities, just bringing people on board to do the work together. That's it. Because any leader who wants to just stick to status quo, there will be no change at all. There won't be.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I love it. Irwin, unmute yourself. Talk to me. What do you need to see?
To say, but
say all the things.
Well, white man takes up space. That's the heading you're gonna.
My co-conspirator
I agree with the courage part, but
Irwin.
I want to acknowledge this, right?
Irwin.
Yes.
Before you continue, so I'm Jamaican, and sometimes we say rewind selector when we go to a dance. So that's what I'm gonna say. And I'm saying that, I'm rewinding it because you are a co-conspirator. And that is why you are a person in my hood. Now, carry on with your bad self.
I know. Okay. Thank you very much for saying that. But I'm going to acknowledge something else.
Bring it.
Ajirioghene said courage, right? I get it. You two are examples of courage. Oh my gosh, right? You're willing to go in, like, you don't need to display no more courage. And the people you're talking about, it's okay. You showed us enough courage, right? Every time your kids go outside and you worry about whether they're going to get stopped by the police, that's courage. Mm-hmm. So no, you don't need to show. We need to show some courage. And the courage we need to show, it's not good enough, right? Not good enough to just be courageous and say, oh, we're going to do change. We're going to make it more welcoming. We're going to train our staff. We're going to, you said one vision, one voice, Ajirioghene, which is, people might not know, it's a great idea from within the system to train workers better. Yeah, it was great. And I was there when I was the advocate when they were trying to set that up, and they brought me into meetings with the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies, and I was saying, okay, but shouldn't this rest in the community? Oh, we're going to have a community courage. We're going to have a community advisory committee. Mm-hmm. And guess what? This now is getting millions of dollars to run that program. The goddamn, excuse my language, people, but Laura May, now I'm in trouble.
Not yet.
That?
Keep it going.
I shouldn't have said that. The darn system got millions of dollars to run. Why doesn't Ajirioghene have $1 million to run the system? And why doesn't she have an advisory group of the Children's Aid if she wants to? Mm-hmm. No, Ajirioghene, come join our advisory group. We need your advice. But we got this. You know why? Yep. Because the courage people like me need to take is to be humble. It's to say, I know something. I know I'm bringing something to the table, but I know I'm missing something. And we need to focus, people like me, on what we're missing. And we cannot do that unless we create space for people like you to take control. And we're your advisors, not our advisors. That's how things will change. And that's what I long for in a government, man. A government that one says every darn decision we make, whether it's about Meals on Wheels or it's about what highway every darn decision centers on the well-being of people. Nothing else. Yeah. Not start with how much does it cost, because we'll figure that out. Nothing, as Ajirioghene and you are talking about, actually some of it, but it doesn't really cost that much money. A lot of it is about doing things differently. Yep. Like being courageous, but humble. Okay, so I want to say that. Well-being, 3 things I think we should be saying to kids, but before, okay, I'll just go with that. 3 things we should be as a province saying to children and families. One is you will be safe and we will protect you. That I want the government to say that and mean it.
Yeah.
It can't unless it makes decisions about well-being of people and not about money again or their political fortunes. Because then you get what some governments have done, quick wins and put out fires, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we need. Quick win, Irwin. I remember hearing it. I heard it, saw it. So children, we will ensure you're safe and protected. Children and young people, every single one. I don't care who it is. Every single one. You will have what you need when you need it in order to thrive. That's no 23,000 people on kids on wait lists, and they're people.
Yeah.
23,000 people on wait lists for mental health for 2 years. 50,000 kids with autism waiting for service for 4 years. 5? Are you kidding me? Like, come on.
Makes no sense.
Every child, you will have what you need when you need it. It's not about how much money is that going to cost, Irwin? It's about how are we going to do that, Irwin? Now I'm in the conversation. And I cannot be in the conversation alone, as you said, Ajirioghene, because I don't know how. Because I need to tap into your expertise, the lived experience of kids. We need Indigenous people to have self-determination so we can tap into their worldview, because that's what I wanted to say. Everything is built in our worldview, which has its gifts, but we value money. Let's be honest. We value money. We talk about, I just had that conversation with my wife. We have to teach our kids about the value of money. They're not learning it. I don't know if we've had a conversation as a family yet. We have to teach our kids the value of nature. We have to teach our kids the value of kindness. We demonstrate it, but we don't have the same conversation. That's our world. We look forward. That's a colonist worldview. It's a liberal democratic worldview. Progress means going forward. Where we're going. Irwin, where do you want to take the province? Irwin, Laramie, where do you want to set your goals? Set your goals. Let's measure them. We don't look back. Not my worldview. It isn't. It's not as bad. It just isn't. So I create institutions and I think about solving problems the way I think.
Yeah.
We need to allow other people with other worldviews to shape our institutions and let us bring to the table what we can bring. That's where the change is going to happen, right? And all this stuff, right? And I have specifics, and I want to read a poem later if I have a chance. Right? No, a poem of a kid. It's so helpful, right?
Yes.
But I'm sorry, I get so exercised about this because I can taste it. I can see. You must too.
Yeah.
I can see what if we allow people like you, if we allow workers to do what they tell me to do, what they went to school for, not be boxed into the system. We allow bureaucrats, I don't know how many, 90,000 bureaucrats. If we allow them, we don't say, here's a funding envelope, do something with it, because that's the language of the system, people. We say, this is what we need. Every child in the province gets what they need when they need it in order to thrive. Make it happen, 90,000 bureaucrats.
Yep.
They can do it. You don't have to say, and here's the funding envelope. They know about money. They're not idiots.
Yep.
Release them to do what they went in the civil service for. And families, I just want to say what we should say to families. We should say to families, for goodness sake, thank you. That's the first thing a province, a government should be saying.
Yeah.
To families, and that they shouldn't care. If you're a bio family, a kin family, a single parent family, adoptive family,
doesn't matter.
Family, a chosen family, thank you. And then we say to them, you will have what you need when you need it to do right by your children. That's it. 3 principles. What an amazing province we could have.
Oh.
That's where we have to start and be humble and create it together, but seriously create it together. Not like, okay, I've advised you, I took your advice and here's what I'm going to do. No, we co-create together and it's possible. It is possible.
It's so possible. It is so
let's
possible.
Do it. Let's do it, Laura. When you're in there, let's go. Let's do it.
We're in.
Kitchener. And the good thing is you can start in Kitchener. Elect her again and start in Kitchener. And get involved, people. Let's go.
Irwin, so I don't know what has happened, but like
I
My
know I went on a
sister,
rage.
no, you did, but you brought my fam jam. Like my sister, who's out in Nova Scotia, and my eldest brother are like on the chat saying things. So my brother wrote to you. It's the Krishnamurti quote, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. We get worked up because we know we have to
Whoa.
change this."
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
My brother is in there.
That
My
worked up.
sister,
It's energy worked up.
it's energy work.
I'm
Um,
ready.
my sister also made a note earlier and said that she actually laughed out loud at work when I said, why would I want to have to find these spaces welcoming? Like, why would I want that? That can't be the goal. Which brings me to this. So thank you. Hey, Lise. Hey.
Sorry, Ajirioghene.
Um, I love this. So typically at this point, I would say, okay, what is the vision? Because I'm all about putting a vision of what we want into the universe. And we've already kind of gone there. I'm just going to do a bit of a recap. And then I don't know why, but my gut is saying after I do this recap that Irwin should read the poem. And then we do one more little, okay, is there anything else we need in this vision? Right? So my recap is this: courageous leadership. I think it's important to name it because courageous leadership speaks transparently. It doesn't speak about transparency, it actually speaks transparently, which means it owns its mistakes. Like, I don't know why we're always in such a tizzy to say sorry or to say that oops, that didn't work out, or here's the impact. I recognize it. We're going to do better. I tend to think that it's because we're not ready, in the words of Beyonce, for that jelly to actually make the change. But I want to believe that we can create a space where it's okay. If I'm trying and my heart is in the right place and I make a mistake, people around me are going to be more willing to join me in trying to figure out how to address whatever the error was if I am transparent. So I think that number one, and that is where that humility comes in, because humility allows me to co-create this, and it allows me to not feel like it has to be my report or my decision or my. It's it's a communal kind of thing that we're creating. The second is the co-conspirators, because we've got to build the movement has to include all of us. I often talk about using your position of power and influence, your sphere of influence, for good. We all have ways that we can influence systems. It is actually faulty to believe that somebody on the margins has no power. Every single person has power. We don't always recognize people's power, and hence why the folks that are on the margin and the most vulnerable are not able to create the change that they know needs to happen, because the society is on them, not allowing them to do anything that lets them dream and grow and thrive. But that's not because they are disempowered, that's because the system is flawed. And so I often tell people, no matter where you are, think about what you can influence. Who can you talk to? Who is in your family networks or anywhere? Who is around? And what is it that you can do, that you can ask them to do, to join in the building of this movement and this change? Um, the third is resistance. I hate this word. Well, I'm wearing it, resist, because this hat is super cool. But resistance to the status quo. I think, like, we can't allow it to be the regular thing. And that's part of why I keep asking in my job for like budget lines, transparent budget lines dedicated to do this work. Not the airy fairy budget lines that are just like extra things that we can never track, but actual, we're going to do implement one vision, one voice. Cool. Then there is a budget line that says one vision, one voice, and X amount of dollars are put there. And there's an accountability mechanism so that we can say this worked, this didn't, we're going to change this, blah, 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 blah. But budget lines, super important. And the last thing on my little list of recapping was people first, people centered. I always talk about that. Put the most vulnerable in the center. If you address the needs of the most vulnerable, literally everybody thrives. It is faulty logic to think that we have to make the people on top better and whatever so that they can then reach down to help folks. No, you got to help the most vulnerable, make sure they can thrive and dream and grow, and then other things will come from that. And so with that recap, I'm going to throw it back over to Irwin. Oh, actually, I'm going to ask you, before I do, Irwin, Ajirioghene, is there anything else that you wanted to add before I ask Irwin to grace us with poems?
Yeah, I'm just going to add the piece about which Owen Ken talked about, and you mentioned it as well. It's the investment in communities. You give the example, Owen, of the idea was that the community would do the work, and now the system has the work, the funds, but there has to be that investment in community, because which goes to the same thing, Laura May Lindo, you said about, I don't want to come into a space. I don't even want to come into that. But they're already navigating other spaces in the community where they feel safe and people who are supporting them. How can the system or systems, not only child welfare, invest in communities and Indigenous communities and Black communities and Muslim communities, associations and things like that? Organizations that have been holding down the fort and continue to do that in spite of limited resources and funds, but they put, like you said, people first, and they're doing the work. So there has to be that piece about, what continuous investment, so they can have develop their own autonomy to be able to come forward and actually push for empowerment of the people who are already disenfranchised in the system. Yeah, I just wanted to have that one.
I love that. I love that. I love that. And in my little notes, because I write notes about everything, invest in community. And that's where the healing has already been happening. Right. And so we just need to keep providing the fuel or the whatever it is that they need, the investments that they need, the fuel for the fire, the kindling for the whatever, however you want to say it. The point is, give them what they need so that they're not struggling to provide the healing. So now, Irwin, I'm going to hand it over to you because I think it's awesome that you're going to
Oh,
do
yeah,
this.
I heard it.
Yeah, it's going to be so good.
Well, just let me say, I agree with you, Ajirioghene. Like, money is power. People like me, that we all know that saying, follow the money, money is power. That's why it goes where it goes. And that's not about any one person. It's not about any person trying to do good anywhere. Because if we call things systemic racism, then guess what? It's about the system. It's not about you in the system working there. Not saying you're a bad person. It's the system. So we have to change that. And in my world, the best way of changing it is where the money, follow the money. Put money is power. That will change something. We know that, right? Yeah. So you asked me like what to do, and I often get asked, because I have these big ideas, as you just hear, and I got more big fluffy ideas. I've been told, and it's like people say, "What the hell do you want me to do with that?" Or like, "What are you gonna do?" And I do have specific, practical ways of changing the way systems on the ground work, so that people like Ajirioghene, when she has a family or a child that she's trying to be supportive to, has everything she needs to provide, and can answer that question. How are you going to make sure that child has what they need when they need it, not 4 years from now, right now? There's ways of arraying, working the system. I think it's kind of boring, but there is ways of doing it, and I'm not going to speak to that. So I do have practical ways, people, but because I'm going to give you another big idea. And it comes from young people, and I hope it resonates for you too, because and you leaders that are wondering, should I be in this space? Because am I really doing real change, or am I just tinkering? It's frustrating, it's hard, it's like, oh my gosh, because people are watching you, and the young people that wrote that report, Hair Story, are watching you. So you are already making a difference. But you have to understand that. And they call it the one person theory, right? And I used to talk about myself. Surprise, I always talk about myself. So this young woman, Wendy Hayes, this is her book. I think she'll be thrilled. She was in care and was adopted, and she wrote a series of poems about herself along the way, and she decided to publish them, use her voice. And there's one poem, well, they're all great. So it's called The Heart That Silence Built, www.theheartthatsilencebuilt.ca. Go find it. You'll never regret it. And the hardest day is about a day when she was in care and her sister was in care and her younger sister was being adopted. and she wasn't going to the same home. So they were saying goodbye to each other and goodbye to their biological mom. And she called that the hardest day. And in Children's Aid, they have, it's not a bad thing. They have things called volunteer drivers. And she was writing about her volunteer driver, the person who volunteers and takes kids from place to place. So let me read what she said. On the hardest day, you were the only one who saw me. On the hardest day, they sent me back to school. They sent me back to school as if nothing happened. A footnote in the notes of my worker, unmentioned by my caregiver, unrecognized by my new life, alone, without my mother, who was too wrapped up in her own grief, called lucky for missing geography, called delinquent for missing geography. Who that cares about geography when there is no ground beneath my feet? This funeral that nobody would call a funeral, that nobody would let me mourn or scream or cry or just end. Everything stopped and everything kept going, but not you. You sat here with me in this empty car where she used to be with me, in this empty life where she used to be with me. It shouldn't have been you, but I guess no one else cared enough to give me a lift to the funeral. You were the only one who wore black. You were the only one who stopped. You were the only one who said, this isn't fair, and I'm here for you as long as you need. You listened to my poems. You who kept coming back for the one nobody cared about. You saw me, maybe because you yourself had just been to a funeral. And she wrote this after he died. Death took you from me, from this world, and they told me I wasn't supposed to mourn you either, that you weren't important enough. But all the supposedly important people weren't there for me on that hardest day. This is something that I never got to say to you, so I'll say it for myself, and I hope that just maybe you can hear it too. Thank you. The gift you gave me on the hardest day has carried me through all the days that followed it. I can't say for sure that I would be here without you. You who saw me when no one else would look. I'm telling you, right? And I'm telling the people that are watching. The cool thing about that is if that volunteer driver was alive, right? And this is some years later. If he was alive, would he remember Wendy who wrote that poem? Okay, maybe. Oh yeah, there's this girl. Would he remember the time when he drove her to school and he said, you can stay in the car as long as you want. I know it's tough. Not likely.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Would he know how much of a difference it made in her life? No way in hell. So Laura May, when you say you're in that place and you don't know if you're making a difference, that's actually true. You don't know. But I guarantee you, Wendy is proof. I believe you have proof of people who don't know they made a difference in your life. You are. And so are, and Ajirioghene, are you? Of course. When it's frustrating, you remember that. And to other people watching, call to action, be kind.
Yes.
Be thoughtful. Be humble. Be curious. And you will never know that you've made a difference, but you have evidence. It's evidence-based practice, as they call it, because you know it's happened to you. If you're watching this and you're any way successful, you know. And the other thing I say, right? Because I'll say this, I did say this to deputy ministers, to ministers. Maybe when you're a minister, Laura May, I'll say it to you, you go, what in heavens do you want me to do with that, Irwin? We can't legislate love. And that deputy minister said that to me. And I didn't know what to say. And a young person I worked with, because everything I'm saying is what I learned from them. Like they said, oh, okay, Irwin, why don't you say this to them? You're right, deputy minister. You can't legislate love. But you can legislate the conditions in which love can flourish. So when Laura May, when you put that bill forward about Emancipation Day, that passed, yep. Is that going to help the conditions? Yes, it is. When you put that bill forward about strengthening really the anti-racism practices in boards of education, would that create the conditions in which love help do that? Yes, it would. Does cutting the board's teachers help the conditions that love can flourish? making classrooms more full because it's somehow, I remember this government said it's going to build resiliency in kids. Is that help the conditions in which love can flourish? No. And she said to tell the deputy, why don't you chew on that, as you say, Laura? Why don't you chew on that? And let's have some outcomes around that. It's actually not rocket science. And that's what I want to say to you, because I know it can be very frustrating. I know if the people in One Vision, One Voice think I just dumped on their program. I did not, because they're trying to figure that out.
Yep.
And they have to believe that what they're doing, you choose a path, you choose where you want to make a difference, and you have to believe that what you're doing is going to change. And that's why I know it's possible. I know it's possible. Young people tell us it's possible. The people at Kitchener, whoever's watching this, let's go.
It's possible.
Let's
It's
go.
possible.
No, not even we know it's possible, so let's go.
Let's go.
Do it.
Let's go. So listen, I need to say thank you to both of you for all of this, and wholly powerful way to end this episode of The People in My Hood, a philosophical podcast. I'm going to repeat Irwin's message and the message from the young person who said this to Irwin. You can't legislate love, but you can legislate the conditions that allow love to flourish. What? I hope that person's going to find their way into, like, honestly, that's what we need to do. And I have to be honest, I've lived in a variety of places. But when I think about the people that I have met in my time in Kitchener Center and the people that are in my hood, I feel like that's what draws us together. Those are the people that become my people here. And those are the people that we're going to be talking to throughout this podcast, people in my hood that are creating conditions to make love flourish in all sorts of different spaces across Kitchener Center and across the province and across Turtle Island and across the world. So thank you. Thanks to everybody for watching. Thank you, Ajirioghene, for joining me. Thank you, Irwin, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Zara, in the background for
Thank
making
you,
sure
Zara.
that all the good things happen. Mwah, mwah. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.